What's going on, guys? Muhammad Tantawi here. I wanted to react to an Umar Johnson video. I recently posted a short talking about marriage, interracial marriage specifically, and Dr. Umar's views on it. Basically, he's against it. And I found another video, and I'm not going to play the whole thing, but I'm going to play a significant chunk, and I want to react to it together because I think he says the most out of the box and borderline, we'll call it crazy statements that if you compared it to mainstream conversations within universities and on the media, like, you wouldn't be able to find someone like him. So let's start here.
Was integration a mistake?
Integration was a mistake, but integration was not a necessity. Remember, the federal government desegregated. It never integrated. The public schools were desegregated. They were never integrated. Desegregation is a legal step where you remove all of the legal and political barriers to access. In other words, if you're not allowed to live in my neighborhood, I desegregate my neighborhood for you. Do I invite you in? No. Do I force you to come? No. I simply say.
I really like that point specifically. I mean, it's like seeing an all-white group at a bar or a fraternity or a sorority, and all of them are white, and you're not going to approach it. You know there's nothing telling you can't, but it's like an unspoken non-invitation. And I think that keeps a lot of people segregated, because if you look around a lunchroom or you look around a mall, most people are hanging out with people who look like them, or at least culturally act like them.
There are no longer any legal barriers to you moving into my neighborhood, but I'm not going to do anything to guarantee your participation. They didn't force us to give up our independent black schools. They didn't force us to give up our independent black hospitals. They didn't force us to give up our independent black supermarkets. They didn't force us to give up our independent black communities. We gave them up voluntarily because deep down in the psyche of the American Negro is an inferiority complex that says, in order for you to truly be successful and truly validate your womanhood or manhood, you have to be accepted by white people. That's why we integrated. Dr. King was dead before integration fully came, but we make him the scapegoat. Don't blame Dr. King, blame us. We couldn't wait to live next door to white folks.
Is that the same psychology that's behind every single?
That was so powerful. That was so powerful. That's like the BLM lady, or the ladies, and the first thing they did with all that money is buy mansions in white neighborhoods. Or when someone, climbs the affluence ladder and becomes more, let's say, rich, they move into white neighborhoods and they hang out in what you would say whiter places. Now, I think the counter to that, you have to think about that white people just own most of the wealth. So if you're going to be more affluent, unless you want to take it to like some really unique all black rich community or overseas or something like that, you're just inherently going to be around white people because most of the wealth is there. So I see what he means. I think it's really powerful. But anyway, let's continue.
Member of the Black Caucus signing off on H.R. 5, the Equality Act. You just explained, you detailed how it undermined our power, our masculinity, and everything to promote these agendas. Why are all the black politicians on board? Why is it required for every single black celebrity who receives big endorsement deals or whatever to be pro these agendas and narratives?
I'm going to defend the Black Caucus, and then I'm going to criticize the Black Caucus.
Okay.
First, let me give them the defense. It is hard to hold your elected officials accountable for their political behavior when you do not financially empower them. Black people do not, in a systematic way, financially support our elected representatives. The average black Democrat has to go to the white Democratic Party to get their campaign financed. The hand that pays is the hand that rules. So in their defense, they're going to do whatever the gays tell them to do. They're going to do whatever the whites tell them to do. They're going to do whatever the Latinos tell them to do because the gays are very well financed. The Latinos are very well financed. The immigrants are very well financed. Europeans are very well financed. And how much organized money are they getting from their own people? Almost none. So until we start our own political action committees, until we create our own lobbying circles to go to Capitol Hill and come here to DC and force them to do right by us, how can I hold them accountable when if they gave up the gay money, gave up the Latino money, gave up the immigrant money, gave up the Mexican money, gave up the white money? Is Black America organized financially enough to step in and fill that economic void? That's what I say in their defense.
Dude, that's interesting. That's interesting. We'll just leave it at that.
Yes. Interject briefly, yes, because I had some experience. You may not be aware of this, but when Coleman Young Jr. II
Detroit
ran against Mike Duggan, the first white mayor since his father,
yes,
I was his #1 backer. Right. I even backed him when he ran for Congress.
And that campaign was a disgrace because I don't understand how that mayor won over him.
Well, I'm just going to tell you, it speaks to a lot of things that you just described. I was not aware of how politics really worked until I got involved in that campaign. And what I want to say on record here for the black people listening is that it's a shame that we even have to provide transportation and food to the polls for you to vote in your own interest. And I've experienced this firsthand. Not only do we have to advocate for you, have to go in our own pockets for you, we have to get transportation to get you to the poll. That mindset got to stop.
It does. And I have to defend black people and criticize them too.
Go ahead.
But first,
criticize them.
Going back to the CBC, my criticism of the Congressional Black Caucuses a few years ago, and you're probably aware of this, they rewrote their mission statement, the Congressional Black Caucus, to say that we no longer only speak for black people. We speak for everybody. In there lies the essential political quagmire of the American Negro. We have almost no mainstream organization that is dedicated exclusively to our improvement. Look at the Chinese. Their organizations are about Chinese people. They're not for everybody. Look at the European Jews. Their organizations are for European Jews, not everybody. Look at the Latinos. Their organizations are for Latinos.
La raza.
But go to the NAACP. NAACP is for everybody. Go to the Congressional Black Caucus. They're for everybody. Go to the Urban League. They're for everybody. I love our Black Greek fraternities and sororities and the work that they've done. But guess what? They're for everybody too. Every mainstream black organization is multicultural, but you can hardly find a multicultural organization amongst another ethnic nation or group.
Why is
That's
that?
our problem. Because we are uncomfortable, we are anxious, and we have a lack of faith in ourselves as African. Remember when you was a child and you went...
I think that points to the social aspect of being a black American, or probably a black person in the United States. I see it firsthand, guys saying they have jungle fever, or, seeing a minority token around like 7 or 8 white people, arms crossed, not really having anything valuable to say, just kind of interjecting with like a fish notes, little side notes, or maybe like a good laugh or a comedic moment. They're not, they can never be the prominent voice of the group. I think there's a lot of truth in what he's saying. I feel like I see it all the time around me. I will say the black fraternities and sororities, they may be for everyone, but they are, I would say, 99% black. And I think that's good, because the time I see black people with the most confidence is in those type of environments, because it feels genuinely inclusive, loving, and real. They actually want to uplift each other. And but on the other hand, I definitely see what he's saying. It's trying to um, maneuver the social landscape while you're an African American is probably one of the toughest things I could imagine for a human being.
Wanted to join a football team, a basketball team, you always went to the winning team. The losing team, even if it was your neighborhood, you would walk 20 blocks to play for the winning team. Most Latinos know that they are African. Most Dominicans know that they are African. But guess what? Until Africans start winning, I'm not identifying with that team. You see, that's what's going on.
Yeah.
That's why you get black people run around and say, I got Indian in me. Or I'm half Irish, I'm half Jew. They won't even let you in the church, but you brag about how you have this and have that. Why do black people get so excited when they find out they got a little bit of white in them? But when white people find out they got a little bit of black, they keep it quiet. We broadcast that I'm part Native and part European. You know why? Because we're not proud to be black. So the minute we find out we got something else in us, it becomes a badge of pride because being an African has been a burden and not a blessing to most of us. But the Honorable Marcus Garvey said it best. He said, the white man has made being black a crime. I will make it a blessing. We have to sell the African back to himself. Now, going to the black voter. I criticize the black voter that we need to be organized and we need to finance our candidates. But on the flip side, we have been disappointed by black elected officials for so long that I cannot criticize a black person for not getting out and voting because they have been through it over and over and have rarely gotten any results. However, I would tell them you can change this overnight. The next time you find a black man or woman who you want to represent you politically, fund them. Fund them. Don't tell Dr. Umar Johnson, run for mayor of Philadelphia, but we're not going to fund you because that means I'm going to end up selling you out. Because the people who pay me, the white banks, Walmart, the auto mall, you see, if I'm being financed by the white giants of capitalism, I'm going to have to carry their agenda. If you want to keep a black politician loyal to you, you must finance him or get out the game.
Okay, now, there's so much here. Mm-hmm. You mentioned Marcus Garvey a few times. A man I admire myself, because considering the period that he lived in and the things he attempted.
And accomplished.
Yeah. His bravery is like, I don't see anything on that level today.
Never before, never again. The Honorable Marcus Garvey was the leader and builder of the largest black organization in modern history. He is the only black leader to lead a 15 million man and woman organization. You can take every black political organization in America today and you don't get the 15 million that Garvey organized. He's the only leader who we can say was leader of the African race. No other leader was leader of the race. Marcus Garvey was leader in Africa. He was leader in Cuba, Australia, Europe, Central South America. In fact, Cuba was the most thoroughly organized island in the Caribbean for Garvey. Puerto Rico had chapters of Garvey. Back then, the whole African world said we are African and we are proud of it. And the beauty of Garvey is he never took a dollar from another race. All those Black Star Line steamships, the universities.
Growing up, I never really learned about Marcus Garvey other than kind of civil rights activist move on. We learned more about the W. Du Bois versus Booker T. Washington kind of contrast and comparison, and really left Marcus Garvey out. But as I've listened to Umar Johnson more in my life, I definitely get a sense that maybe Marcus Garvey was the prominent man being left out a little bit, and I wonder why that is. I know Marcus Garvey got sent overseas, and he was seen as a threat by the U.S. government, and maybe what he was doing was, detrimental to, what officials in the government wanted to take place in America. But it definitely seems like a mainstream idea is to integrate black people into being an American. That idea, Umar Johnson seems to believe to integrate black people, to recognize their African roots and kind of take pride in their history. And I wonder why we've separated that schism, or that didn't make no sense. We've separated, those two philosophies, because you really can't be on board with both. If you were to find, pride in being an African. I don't know if that makes you, less patriotic or, less willing to push American narratives. So, as a country in America that still takes advantage of countries in Africa, maybe, if more people believed what Umar Johnson believed, there would be a harder time for companies to go and forage for the resources that African countries could utilize themselves.
The factories, all of that, the Garvey military was built with 100% black pennies. And Garvey was the only leader since Frederick Douglass and Booker T. Washington to build an organization, and he did not have to use a religion. Everybody after Garvey had to give you Islam. They had to give you Christianity. They had to make up a religion. Garvey is the only one who had the strength and the vision to keep religion out of it. And look what he did. Nobody before and nobody since has done what Mosiah did for Africans.
Is that a big part of the reason why Garvey isn't really in the African American Museum?
He's in there. They have him and Elijah Muhammad squeezed in the corner.
Yeah, that's what I heard.
But Thomas Jefferson is on the slavery exhibit, gigantic statue up on the Now, mind you, this is about slavery now. And you have a man who owned over 400, who was a sexual pedophile, used to sexually molest a little black girl, Sally Hemings, was so infatuated with this little black girl that he would take her on tour with him to Europe so he could molest her over there. But of course, American historians like to remix history and say it was a love affair. How can a 12-year-old...
All right, this is just freaking disgusting. I didn't know this, but this reminds me of the Pocahontas thing. This reminds me of, what's his name, John Rolfe, and how they took Pocahontas and baptized her and changed her name to Rebecca. So this is disgusting. And the fact that, they have a statue of him in the museum... It kind of reminds me of a couple years ago. It's gone now, but growing up in high school, there was a bust, a head of Nathan Bedford Forrest, and there were several statues of him around Nashville, Tennessee. That's where I grew up. And I remember we went on the school field trip every year in the state capitol, right in the middle, right next to the Senate Hall. There was this bust of his head, and it was right next to the door, and it was just like... You would see it to the left every time you walked in and see it to the right every time you walked out of the door. And you always wonder, well, if you were wondering, why is that there exactly? So, this is disgusting.
Girl have a love affair with a 45-year-old man. That's impossible. But the point that I'm making is in that museum, in my opinion, and some of the scholars take issue with me, and I don't care. First of all, the Smithsonian has never been in front of black folks. Remember, it was the same Smithsonian that took a black boy from Central Africa by the name of Ada Benga and paraded him around in the zoo, right? And it wasn't until the black churches got together and forced the Brooklyn Zoo to take him out the cage with the gorillas, and he committed suicide. That's the Smithsonian. So
What?
I'm not surprised that the Smithsonian got a big statue of Thomas Jefferson in the slavery exhibit. But Marcus Garvey and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and the Honorable Marcus Garvey got a little picture that you might miss if you're not paying attention.
That's what I was told.
And no statue.
So, as someone who grew up Muslim, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, there's no honorable there. I mean, he may have been an activist in some ways, and I know he influenced Malcolm X, but Malcolm X turned on him eventually, and yeah, he has some modern-day supporters like Khalid Muhammad and what's his name, Louis Farrakhan, and others. The nation's still pretty large. There's actually a church here in Baton Rouge, or a mosque, I guess they would call it, North Baton Rouge, in like a kind of shady area. But I would not compare Elijah Muhammad to Marcus Garvey. Elijah Muhammad leveraged off already present religion, and modern-day Muslims, Sunni especially, do not see him as a real... sect of Islam. I mean, that's just, you will not find any mainstream Muslim to accept Elijah Muhammad's teachings.
For Harriet Tubman, but Serena and Venus got a big one. No disrespect to them, you see? But there's no statue of Frederick Douglass, but LeBron James got a big screen TV with all his dunks and slam dunks, and Michael Jordan got a platinum statue but there's no statue for Ida B. Wells or Fannie Lou Hamer. Is that a museum of African American history and culture, or is it a museum of African American celebrity and coonism? I'm not sure.
Damn. I just speak on the LeBron James part. Michael Jordan deserves no political medals. I mean, this man, in his own right, in his own with his own words, proclaimed a non-partisanship or non-association to political events. LeBron James, though, will parade around and does parade around as if he is an activist. And I've heard people like Chris Broussard, say like if he wanted to, he could run for president. And that's just the most asinine thing I've ever heard in my life. LeBron James is probably one of the best actors of all time. And when I mean actors, I mean you could give him an Oscar for the way he pretends to know about anything related to anything that has to do with history, politics, cultural issues, trends. This man is just another famous celebrity. And I wish that people would understand that more. I on the Serena and Venus part, though, I do think that black women have an especially hard time in this country, and sometimes you have to use like a prominent athlete or a prominent position to endorse the idea, and there's just not many prominent black women. So I think using Venus and Serena, especially them being sisters and having a great father, just exemplifies the importance of a good family structure. And I think those are very good role models to use, actually.
Now, who we're gonna start with Garvey and come back to these celebrities that's put on the forefront. Who undermined Garvey? Was it Robert Moton?
It was Robert Moton, we learned later, was a United States Army undercover agent who was sent to Tuskegee to spy on the Honorable Booker T. Washington, because contrary to public belief, Booker T was not a coon. Booker T said what he needed to say in front of the white man and did what he needed to do in back of the white man. Booker T. Washington had the International Conference on the Negro before Garvey. He had the International Conference on the Negro before W.E.B. Du Bois Pan-African conferences. Booker T. Washington used Tuskegee Institute as a hideout for black revolutionaries. If you was on a run from the Klan or the government and you couldn't find nowhere to hide out, guess what? You could hide at Tuskegee. And that's why they sent R.R. Moton in. Why would you send an agent to spy on a coon? You don't send agents to spy on coons. You send agents to spy on real, authentic race men. Booker T. Washington paid for civil rights struggles out of his pocket without the white men who financed Tuskegee not even knowing that. So we got to do our history on these great men, and not just because we hear something, run with it. Study him. Booker T was one of the greatest black men we ever had. Why you think Garvey came to America in the first place? To meet with Booker T. Because Booker T was a Pan-Africanist, even before Garvey. Booker T helped publicize and advertise the first Pan-African conference of 1900. He was doing Garvey before Garvey had a chance to take it to the level that Garvey took it to. But it was W.E.B. Du Bois, who I do have respect for. I visited his grave and office in Ghana last week. I respect Dr. Du Bois for the work he did. But that does not take away from the fact that he, because of his bourgeoisie mentality, destroyed the greatest black movement we had. It was W.E.B. Du Bois, working for the United States government, that almost single-handedly undermined everything Marcus Garvey tried to do. He was not alone. Another great black man, A. Philip Randolph, who organized the Sleeping Car Porters Union, he hated Garvey. And why did they hate Garvey?
So, to interject, I took a history class last semester on campus at Louisiana State University. I will say we learned more about A. Philip Randolph and W. Du Bois than Booker T or Marcus Garvey. I sit here watching this video, reacting to it, and I'm wondering why. And not to say that I know a lot about Marcus Garvey. The point is I don't. But I know A. Philip Randolph, and I know W. Du Bois. And I also know that W. Du Bois was associated with the founding of Planned Parenthood and the birth control pill. And I'm just wondering, it seems like just the more mainstream you stay, the safer you are. And it's just that's just so sad to me.
The Sleeping Car Porters Union, he hated Garvey. And why did they hate Garvey? because they couldn't understand how a Jamaican-born African, you're not even from here, and you show up on 125th and 5th, and you able to organize black people better than any other leader we've seen since Douglass. Remember, W.E.B. Du Bois had to wait for Frederick Douglass to pass on. He had to wait for Booker T to pass on. So when them two giants cleared the air, Du Bois said, I'm next. I'm from Harvard. I'm from Fisk. I studied in Berlin. I'm half white. I should be the leader of black America. And right before he stepped up, a short, black, pudgy, black man got off the banana boat from Jamaica and said, up, you mighty race, you can accomplish what you will. And he stole all of W.E.B. Du Bois' shine. And W.E.B. Du Bois never forgave Garvey for stepping into the leadership vacuum that he himself couldn't fill. He apologized later. He wrote a letter to Queen Mother Amy Jakes Garvey, and he said, I'm sorry for what I did to your husband. In retrospect, it was wrong, but the damage was already done. And then after he got Garvey kicked out of America, he started preaching Garveyism. And guess what? At the end of his years, W.E.B. Du Bois renounced his U.S. citizenship, moved to Ghana at the invitation of Kwame Nkrumah, another Garveyite who studied in Philadelphia, and he died in Ghana, a Ghanaian citizen.
Listening to this is just, there's something beautiful about the story that he says about Du Bois and Garvey, and just something beautiful about hearing the alternative narrative of race and what it really means, to have pride for yourself, because in America we devalue culture and heritage and everything associated with your past to mean, progressive values and the self-actualization of your sexuality and your personality, and, just being, just disassociated with past time tradition. And there's something beautiful about, hearing Dr. Umar talk and, the associations between prominent figures that you may hear in passing, the connection between all of them, and how, historically he's read and read enough to be able to put together a narrative for you that connects all of these guys and how they, in the moment, disagreed with each other.
And not a U.S. citizen. But look at the irony. He was old enough to be Garvey's father. But Garvey knew at 30 what it took Harvard-trained Du Bois to learn that almost 100 years later.
Well, you can't change white folks. He was Harvard indoctrinated.
Yeah. And that's why I love Dr. Carter G. Woodson, Miseducation of the Negro. We visited his house yesterday. Carter G. Woodson was also Harvard. And he was the first.
I actually read a book by this guy. I read parts of different chapters, but it's called The Negro in Our History. And it gives an account of the life of a slave and an indentured servant during the 17 and 1800s. You'd be surprised of how much, being poor will associate you despite your race. All I'll say is that. I mean, I haven't read the whole book, but you can find it on archive.org, and I'll even link it in the description below.
Black person to get a doctor from Harvard whose parents were born into slavery. But guess what? There's another black man who should have been the first one with a PhD from Harvard. It ain't Woodson. It ain't Du Bois. It's Martin Delany, the grandfather of Pan-Africanism. Do you know that in the 1800s during slavery, Martin Delany was accepted into Harvard Medical School during slavery? And they kicked him out because the white students said, we will not go to class if you don't get this N out of here. And they protested Martin Delany. And that's why the father of revolutionary Pan-African nationalism never got his PhD from Harvard first. Remember, he said, Africa for the Africans. It was Garvey who borrowed Martin Delany's words and added Africa for the Africans, those at home and those abroad.
Back to Robert Moulton briefly. Just to substantiate some of your claims about government conspiracies against
Army
the
agent,
black man.
intelligence officer.
Yeah, but he's also the one who oversaw the Tuskegee syphilis experiment. Is that
not? I don't know, but I need to check into that. I didn't know that.
And that experiment actually didn't end until the early 70s.
Yes.
Yes. And that's an experiment where black people were infected with syphilis.
Oh, yeah.
Knowingly
No, unknowingly.
Well,
they told him it was a vaccination.
It was unknowingly to them, but knowingly
to
the
the government.
complicity of the administration, Moulton and his people at Tuskegee.
Absolutely. And the government still experimenting on black folks. Why do you think they have all these prisons? Because prisoners are the most convenient route to human research monkeys, where you don't have to worry about the human rights groups coming in to fight for them. Think about it. You in prison. You got 20 years to do. Nobody coming to visit you. You ain't got no money on your books. If you work in the prison, you get 70 cents an hour. But then you have a research company come up to you and say, we're working on some new medication. We don't know what the side effects are, but we don't think it's going to be anything. We're going to give you $1,000 a month. All you got to do is take this pill. What do you think them brothers are going to do? What do you think them sisters are going to do? And this is why I tell Africans who have loved ones in prison, go visit them. Go see them. Because if they don't see you and they start losing hope and they become despondent, they will sign on to those research experiments where they sign a waiver that if this does harm you, you can never sue us ever again. I'll give you two big research experiments they're doing on black folks right now. One is the MMR vaccination, measles, mumps, and rubella. It is causing autism in black boys. This has been validated and proven, and even research whistleblowers from the Center for Disease Control have authenticated that it is the MMR vaccination that's triggering autism in black boys, research monkeys. And research monkeys number 2 is ADHD. Isn't it amazing that most black men in prison are in there for nonviolent drug-related offenses, right? But the same drug that's sending black men to jail for 10, 20, 50 years, they're calling it Ritalin. They're calling it Adderall. They're calling it Concerta. They're calling it Metadate. They're calling it Cycler. And they're sending it into the public schools and giving it to black boys so they can sit still long enough to be miseducated by middle-class white women who can give a damn whether they learn or not. The AD.
Those are some powerful words right there. I admit, I don't know much about the measles vaccination. I do have my own conspiracy theories over conspiratorial views around ADHD. I don't feel like being able to sit still or being able to not focus on something is something that's, inherently a medical issue. I think education should be tailored towards you. What he's saying though is very just mind blowing, and I as just a ethnically a North African, I just sometimes am amazed at the journey that people who put in years of dedication of study into certain causes like black progression in the United States. I just am amazed at the encompassing views that all seem to bolster an idea that in this case is that Black America is systematically being oppressed.
PhD conspiracy against black boys is a modern day Tuskegee syphilis experiment, and the side effects of these drugs that they give our boys for so-called attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which is nothing but ain't no daddy at home disorder, or it's nothing but artificial diet at home disorder, or it's nothing but ain't no discipline at home disorder. They're making $30 billion a year while they destroy the mental of black boys. They erode their ability to have children. They cause tic disorders, psychosis, schizophrenia, suicidal thoughts, homicidal thoughts, organ failure. In fact, most of the drugs they give our boys for ADHD cannot legally be prescribed in most European nations because of its toxicity. So when you talk about Tuskegee, it ain't over. They never stopped Tuskegee. They just transformed it into the autism vaccination conspiracy and the ADHD hustle against black boys.
All right, guys. I want to thank you so much for watching. That was about 20 minutes of raw Dr. Umar Johnson. I feel like he's one of the most underrated and mind-boggling and really thought-provoking men of our time. I would love if you liked and subscribed to the video. And as always, I appreciate you watching. I will see you on the next one. Muhammad Tantawi.